Oh, alright, it's silly, okay? Allow me to set the scene. A much younger Stillmore playing Ultimate Spider-Man on the GameCube. To this day, one of my favorite games of all time, just having an absolute blast swinging around New York City as Spider-Man and rampaging around it as Venom. It did a lot of things no other Spider-Man game before or since did. It had the biggest map, super easy to master combat, a focus on exploration and collection, a highly unique graphical style, some super cool costumes, and a solid sense of humor. In fact, it's the only Spider-Man game I took the time to play through multiple times, and bizarrely, it's not a game I see many other people talk about. I didn't really find any other game to fill that particular Spider-Man-shaped hole in my heart since then. Even the games based on the Sam Raimi films really didn't do it for me. That all changed when Insomniac released their version of Spider-Man. Spider-Man PS4 had way more in common with Ultimate Spider-Man than it does with any other Spider-Man game that I've played, and that, in my mind, is the best possible outcome. It felt like an updated version of the game I grew up with, and it brought me a lot of joy to revisit, and given the almost identical web-swinging and combat mechanics, the nostalgia was palpable. That said, Spider-Man Miles Morales is, for all intents and purposes, more Spider-Man, which in my mind is a very good thing. I've always been a fan of Miles, and even recall wishing he would make an appearance as a playable character during my playthroughs of other Spider-Man games, so when he showed up in Spider-Man PS4, I was really hopeful that this game would happen down the line. And now I've said Spider-Man so many times it's starting to sound weird in my mouth, so I'm gonna try not to use it for at least another 4 sentences. Anyway, the reason I give you this little bit of history with my background on Spider-Man games is because I wanted to point out that I do have a nostalgic attachment to this property, but I also pride myself on my ability to look around my nostalgia goggles a little bit and look at things objectively. And, well, there's some things about this game that I really don't like at all. I'm gonna go over everything I liked and dislike as I go, and I'm going to get into some mild spoilers, so be warned about that. And I say mild spoilers because this game is about as paint-by-numbers as you can get where the plot is concerned. I think the best way to go about reviewing this game is to summarize the plot and stop here and there to give my praises and criticisms as we go, so let's start at the start. Which is usually where things start. The game opens with Miles stepping off the subway line into Harlem, where he moved to with his mom after the events of the first game. We take a quick mosey through town, where we showcase what a nice dude Miles is, and how he's less appreciated than the original Spider-Man. Which makes sense. I mean, he's barely been Spider-Man for a few months, and Peter Parker has been at it for almost a decade. It's okay not to blow up right away. Sometimes you gotta wait. Grind a bit. So Miles gets a call from Peter Parker that a high-security prison transport is moving through town and they should keep an eye on it, and this is where I had my first moment of pure joy. The web swinging in this game has a brand new coat of paint, and I love it. In the first game, Spider-Man had already been web swinging for 8 years or so, and as a result, his motion looked very fluid and practiced. He looked in control. Miles is very new to the whole thing still, and it shows in his traversal animations. I love the way he flails through the air and seems to still be unsure about the timing of grabbing and releasing the web. It's just a really nice attention to detail and brings fresh life to a mechanic that should have been a bit stale for anyone who recently played the first game. My only real criticism, and this kind of applies to the game as a whole, is that Miles feels like he's very aware of the camera. I know that sounds weird, but if you've played the game or can pick it up from the footage I show, you'll see what I mean. There are a couple of traversal mechanics that have been added to take advantage of Miles' bioelectric powers, but they don't add a whole lot and I barely use them. They're just kind of there to differentiate Miles from Peter a little bit more. So anyway, the Spider-Mans... Spider-Men? Spiders-Man? Spider People? The Spider People make their way to the convoy, and one particular containment cell, which is being transported by helicopter, begins to come loose. Miles jumps in to help, but gets his web tangled up in the chopper's rotors, causing a massive crash and allowing the prisoners to escape.
Helix 2 is going down! Freeze, freeze, freeze! Helix 2 is down! No casualties! No casualties! No casualties!
I'm sorry, did you see what I just saw? Those people are dead. Dead. So we fight Rhino, and despite having fought and beat him countless times before, Peter somehow gets beat up and is taken out of commission. In a moment of desperation, Miles discovers his new electrical powers. like spiders have. Defeats Rhino and saves Peter. And then we meet this guy.
Guys? Wow, just... wow. Simon Krieger.
Gee, I wonder who the bad guy is going to be. So it turns out this guy is the CEO of Roxxon, and, Insomniac, now I don't mean to date you, and by extension myself, but you do realize that probably 70% of the audience for this game has no idea about the ExxonMobil scandals, right? I'm just gonna put that out there. You probably could have gone with something off BP, though. I feel like that's still reasonably fresh. Anyway, Roxxon is a sing it with me now, evil corporation covering their evil plans with the public face of kind community service. By that I mean they've been installing reactors around Harlem to try to provide clean energy to the city, and yeah, you can more or less figure out how that's gonna go. So Peter informs Miles that he's going to be in Europe for a few weeks, and Miles is going to be on his own looking after the city, and with that, the stage is set. But not before Spider-Man drops this line.
New York's only Spider-Man.
You ever notice that? They always pull that line out with Miles as if it's a buffer against people who don't like him as much as Peter Parker, but to me it feels like it just screams for one of those we have food at home memes. Anyway, Miles heads home for a family dinner with his mom, his best friend Genki, and his other friend Finn, who he hasn't seen in a while. I wonder who the other bad guy is going to be. So, halfway through dinner, the power goes out, and Miles heads out to the fire escape to try to fix it. This whole sequence was kind of one giant eye roll for me, and I'm gonna take the time to walk you through why. See, Miles announces that he's going out through the fire escape, which is off his bedroom window.
Let me check if I can see anything from the fire escape.
Okay, cool. Now everyone knows that's where he went, and he's got easy access back inside from there since we see him enter the apartment through that window earlier. And so, after heading out the fire escape, he heads up and around the side of the building to the, weird LED power panel? This thing. And he gives it a shock with his electric powers, and that somehow gets the whole building working again. Okay, that's fine. You just gotta suspend your disbelief a bit here. Especially if you worked construction for the better part of a decade, but no one here has done that. I mean, it's not like electronics need a steady source of power at very specific voltage and amperage to keep running, and a single burst of electricity of random quality would probably burn out even more components. And it's not like if that power was maintained at the source, it would backfeed through the lines, probably injuring anyone working on them and causing the fuses to just blow right out again once the lines were fixed and the actual power was added to the power Miles is sending through the lines. You know, it's not like there's a reason generators have such specific installation and safety requirements. Okay, but exaggerated nitpicks for the sake of comedy aside, this is where it actually gets stupid. See, just watch how Miles decides to get back into the apartment.
Still outside?
Actually, what about a photo?
Right now?
Yeah, precious moments. You gotta capture them.
Shouldn't we wait for Miles?
No, he hates photos. All right, everyone squeeze in. Ready? Great photo, great photo. Oh, hey, Miles.
Okay, now let's break that down. First, he just takes a chance on Genki just happening to be the only one looking out the window. Then he opens this window about, 10 feet away from everyone? You ever open a window into a warm room in the middle of a northeastern winter? Let's just say they'd notice a draft. But even putting all this aside, he then decides to do his little spider crawl into that window, which I don't think I have to explain why that's a stupid move, and then he pretends to have come in the front door. I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to think about that. Okay, so everyone was fully aware he had gone out the fire escape. Wouldn't his coming in the front door raise even more questions than him just coming back in through the bedroom window? Oh, hey Miles, I thought you went out the fire escape. Yeah, I did, but then I, fell off. Yeah, there really is no reason for any of this other than because Miles knows there's a camera watching and had to provide this little bit of suspense. This really is indicative of one of my issues with this game as a whole. Insomniac definitely had the B team working on the writing because the number of things being done just for the sake of doing them and the amount of plot convenience is off the scale. So the next morning, Genki and Miles decide to test out the new suit and Genki's new app that's basically like Uber but for Spider-Man. Spooberman. Spoober-moober. Anyway, throughout the course of the game, Genki will call you to say the app is climbing in popularity in the App Store, ending up in the top 25 or so. And so I assumed that it would be a hub for a bunch of randomly generated side quests like we've seen in other Spider-Man games. But there's actually just 12 side quests to do, so I guess Manhattan is just way emptier than I thought. Also, I know what you're thinking, and no, not once does someone use it to lure Miles into an ambush. I know! Total wasted opportunity. Which kind of brings me to another little gripe about this game, which also applies across the entire history of Spider-Man games, and that's that New York doesn't quite feel right. Don't get me wrong, they did a pretty good job simulating the layout, but there's a certain energy around New York that's apparently really hard to capture in a game. Everything is way too clean, and it feels oddly devoid of life. I mean, it would definitely be rough on the hardware to render all the traffic and trash blowing around, and until my PlayStation can beam the smell of human urine directly into my nostrils, it's just not going to feel quite right. I also never saw a single person accuse a lamppost of being a government spy or remove their hat just to scream into it and place it back on their head. I guess it's not majorly important since you spend most of the game far above street level, but I can never quite keep myself from walking the streets a bit in these games, and whenever I do, I always come away feeling oddly disappointed by how dead the city feels. If you're playing this game and really want the New York experience, I recommend playing it near a full litter box with dirty air conditioning water dripping directly onto your head. It really adds to the immersion. The app tutorial kicks off with some side questing to round out the roster of side characters, and then the story starts for real. See, it turns out the materials used in making these reactors is making people sick. Oh no, who would have guessed? And at the same time, there's a new high-tech gang in town that seems to have their own vendetta against Roxxon, so Miles and Genki team up with a podcast host of all things to shut down all the reactors and stop both of these entities. This podcast host, whose name is Danica, actually doesn't really do a whole lot other than be this game's version of J. Jonah Jameson's podcast from the first game. I can't bring myself to like it nearly as much though, because A, she has the personality of a paper towel and some old bathwater, and B, she's a bit of a Spider-Man sycophant.
A Spider-Man stan?
And it's way less fun seeing Spider-Man be praised than it is to see him get berated. This might sound weird for people who only know Spider-Man from these games or the new movies, but part of the joy of Spider-Man is that no matter how many times he saves the day, he always kind of ends up getting screwed over. I think it's just a very relatable situation to do your best and then end up getting chewed out over some minor thing that went wrong in the process rather than praised for what went right. It's an integral part of Spider-Man's character and what kept me coming back to him for all these years. Now that I think about it, I had a really similar complaint about the character interactions in Watch Dogs Legion. So maybe I'm just a curmudgeon who doesn't like seeing people be nice to each other. From here on out, the story just kind of hits all the beats you expect from this kind of thing. There's the bit where Miles figures out his friend is the leader of the gang he's been fighting, calling herself the Tinkerer, and so he reveals his identity to her to try to convince her to stop trying to blow up Harlem. It doesn't work. The two of them end up getting captured by the other bad guy, escape, and then fall out again before Miles has a chance to convince her to stop her destructive plans. She sets off an explosion in the reactor system, then suddenly goes, oh hey, yeah, maybe let's not do that, and then sacrifices herself to help Miles save the day. I won't lie to you, I honestly found the ending to be a bit lame. You'll know it when you see it, but there's one particular freeze frame at the very end that I just couldn't help but roll my eyes at on the merit of it being so heavy-handed and overdone. So yeah, that in a very vague nutshell is Spider-Man Miles Morales, and I actually did enjoy it quite a bit. It's short and sweet, and I finished the main campaign, all the side quests, and gathered most of the collectibles in about 20 hours. It stays very focused on its central cast, and it doesn't stray much from the main plot line, which I really like, and I think more games could benefit from this kind of tight focus. That said, I would have liked to see a bit more characterization among the core cast. With the exception of Miles himself and the occasional appearance of Miles' Uncle Aaron, everyone is pretty bland. Finn is, smart but angry, but Miles knows deep down she's really nice. Genki is smart and nice. Danica is smart and nice. Miles' mom is smart and nice, and the possible love interest girl is smart and wait for it, nice. I mentioned before that there's a lot of listening to Miles getting praised for everything he does, even when what he does has endangered countless innocent lives, and that does pull me out of things a little bit. I do like that he's not as self-assured as he wants everyone to think, but I would have liked to see his mistakes from the beginning of the game have a larger impact on the story as a whole. I mean, the guy literally causes a helicopter crash in the middle of Manhattan, which allows Rhino to escape, putting thousands of people in danger, and Peter is just like, yeah, no worries, that happens. What are you gonna do? You're still the best ever, and I'm totally comfortable leaving the safety of Manhattan entirely in your hands. I just think it really would have added a lot to Miles' arc if Peter did snap on him just a little bit. Not even in an angry way, but just to admonish him a bit for not analyzing the situation before jumping in head first. Instead, we get this character who is, yeah, maybe mildly unsure of himself, but is just constantly getting battered by praise in all directions, and I don't think too many people can relate to that. All in all, is it a recommend? Honestly, I don't think it is yet. In my mind, it's still kind of overpriced for what you're getting and is essentially just a $50 DLC for the first game with some minor tweaks and some of the gadgets having been replaced with a couple of new powers. The plot is serviceable at best, and even though it's filled with conveniences and poor writing tropes, I did really enjoy that it keeps a tight focus on the central characters and doesn't get too bogged down in side plots. I also really enjoyed Miles' interaction with his uncle Aaron. He's a really tragic figure, and one of the few people in the game that's willing to show Miles some tough love. The problem is he just kind of gets sidelined for a good chunk of the game and only pops up here and there to push the plot along when he has to. Other than that, all the other characters felt like they only exist for the purpose of filling out the cast rather than because they really add anything interesting, and they all feel very cut and paste. Like I said before, I like Miles. I've been a fan of this character for years, and I like this version of Miles, but I can't help but feel like a lot of writers aren't really sure what to do with him, and in an attempt to differentiate him from Peter Parker, they end up sucking out a lot of his charm, which causes him to feel kinda generic. It's sad, really, because I think he has a lot of potential to be great, but in order to be great, you have to take risks, and it seems that when it comes to Miles, no one is willing to do that. Instead, they just pile on wins without really thinking about how impactful it is to see a hero struggle. I think it can be best summed up with a line,
"He's our Spider-Man,"
in reference to Miles. My issue with it is that at no point is it shown that Peter Parker neglects Harlem or any other part of the city. In fact, one of the first things you see is someone painting a mural of Peter Parker in Harlem. Not to mention that Miles himself is new to Harlem, is originally from Brooklyn, and moves around the city as Spider-Man just as much as Peter Parker does. It just feels disingenuous and maybe a little bit forced, as well as given that other than having saved Harlem one time, a thing Peter has definitely done multiple times already, he really hasn't earned his place in the pantheon of iconic heroes yet. I won't say I came away from this game disappointed, but I did come away from it feeling maybe a bit more lukewarm to Miles than I was before. As I said, I've been a fan of this character for a really long time, and I'm really happy that this game and Into the Spider-Verse has brought more awareness to his existence, but I feel like most of the people who have handled his stories don't share my respect or admiration for him, and see him more as of a prop than as a character, and I really don't see this game as being much of an exception. In fact, the biggest issue with how Miles acts in this game is a great metaphor for the character across his entire history. Just about anyone who tries to write Miles is extremely focused on differentiating him from Peter Parker, but also trying to instantly place him at the same iconic level, and Miles just isn't there yet. He hasn't earned it. One day, I really hope he does, because I, much like Miles, have looked up to Spider-Man since I was a kid, and with Spider-Man himself now being well into his 20s or 30s across most mainstream timelines, there's a huge amount of potential for this young Spider-Man to strike out on his own. If only someone would take advantage of it and let him carve out his own space rather than try to force him into a position that hasn't actually been vacated yet. So, to wrap up, I think this game is going to be pretty good for anyone who is already a fan of Miles Morales, or for people who just want more Spider-Man fun after the first game, but don't go into it expecting to be dazzled. It's a game of highs and lows, and I absolutely had fun playing it, but ultimately, it's far from a spectacular Spider-Man. Well, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Hey, if you've made it this far, you already know the drill. Please like, subscribe, drop a comment for the algorithm, and share the video if you're feeling generous. Like I said, this game was kind of near and dear to my heart, and I really wish I could have been more positive about it, but I don't like to shovel out praise to things just because I have a nostalgic attachment to them. It just feels dishonest to praise something just because it's, on the surface level, something I really wanted, but didn't really deliver once you scratch below that surface. So anyway, that's going to do it for me. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back next week with a new one. As of the time of recording this, I actually don't know what it's going to be. I usually have them planned out a week in advance, so yeah, I really don't know what I'm going to do this time. So it'll probably be another weird indie film, something not many people have heard of just because I really like covering, lesser known things. And if you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see me review, please feel free to drop me a line or drop a comment. I would love to hear from you. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.